Hey everyone, what's going on? It's If You Have to Pick Three. It's Matt.
And it's Zach.
If you haven't joined us for one of these before, we each get a pick three list in a particular topic, and then we talk about it, and we get a final three list, and you click the picture. This time, we're getting into an area that is very touchy for some people, and I don't know why. I mean, I guess from one aspect, I can see why, and this is the side of the coin that I'm on. Like, if you started out one way as a band, and then, yeah, you can slowly change and morph and evolve over time, that's fine. But then there's just some bands that go off the rails and sound absolutely nothing like the bill of goods they sold you on their debut album.
And then sometimes it's for the best, sometimes it's not for the best. I mean, there's some bands who have drastically changed their sound since their debut album and have gone on to great success, whether it's winning over new fans or even pleasing their current ones. Because it goes back to the argument, like, don't you want to see your favorite band evolve, or do you want to just hear them do the same exact thing? But then there's also the bands who are like, why would you do that? Or it's just clearly an attempt to sell out or just for a cash grab. It's always a mixed bag. You never know. And I guess that's just the artistic chances that these artists take, as to changing.
You never know what you're going to get.
Are we allowed to quote that movie? Do we need to get the rights for that?
No.
So yeah, we decided, let's discuss the top 3 bands who sound nothing like their debut album. Some of these bands are still around, some of them are not, but the clear indication is whatever their last album is sounded so drastically different from then how they started. But before we get into our lists, special shout out to Lucky 13 Beard Co.
Ever wanted to just make yourself feel better for whatever reason? Maybe you're having a bad day. Or maybe, your facial hair is just naturally rough and you just want to pamper yourself a little bit. I advise you really give Lucky 13 a try. And I've tried a lot of beard balms. I've tried a lot of beard oil. None of it's really worked for me. Some of it smells great. It doesn't work great. Some of it works good, smells not so great. Lucky 13 is, I think, really got that rare combination of both, that it makes you both feel good and smell good. And we're also going to help you smell epic, because we've got our own beard balm and oil with Lucky 13. It's the Lemmy, and it's in tribute of Lemmy from Motorhead, and it's got everything in there that he embodied: a little bourbon, cola, tobacco, leather. It smells fantastic, and the guys at Lucky 13 nailed it. So if you want to give it a try and you want to make yourself feel better, feel good, head on over to Lucky 13, the number, beardco.com. Click on the product page, and then the first thing on there is the Lemmy, the little blue bottle. Give it a click, put it in your cart, and anything else that you want to put in your cart. They got beard combs and just a lot of different scents. Throw them in your cart and use the code EFP10 at checkout. 10% off of your order. Lucky 13, the number, beardco.com.
Ironically, that is a band that has sound consistently like every album.
Yes.
And we discussed that further in a past If You Have to Pick 3 episode, but just a little fun side comment. Matt, I'm going to let you go first and share your 3 for us, because I'm a gentleman.
Well, I was really wanting to go first on this one, so I'm glad you're letting me go first.
You're welcome.
So I really do feel strongly about these picks. And the first one really for me is the big one for me. And it's Opeth. If you've never heard Opeth before, they are or were a very death metal progressive band early on in their career from the album Orchid. And then they started moving, progressively more into like some slower stuff, but it was still kind of in the same vein. Now they're starting to get a little bit deeper into their careers, and I'm going to say his name wrong because it's got some crazy Swedish or Danish circle over his name, but Michael Akerfeld. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I never could pronounce it right. But he said that he doesn't want to do the death metal growling thing anymore. And they've started later on in their career moving more and more and more away from that. Like, I think Ghost Reveries and maybe a little bit of Maybe a little bit after that, they had some growling in like Watershed, but I think way like after that, like once you hit Heritage and Cusp of Eternity, or Pale Communion, not Cusp of Eternity, Pale Communion, Sorceress, and then Incaudia Venium. I can't pronounce that name either. I know somebody's going to correct me. Um, it's absolutely 70s progressive rock. There's no shred of anything that was on Orchid or Morning Rise or My Arms, Your Hearse. And a lot of people gave them flack for when they did Damnation, because that's really like all slow and ballady, but it's still very dark. And it was a great album, but it wasn't the Opeth that you knew. They turned it around with Ghost Reveries and still kind of gave you that growl, and then they just started to move further and further and further away just because they don't want to do that anymore. And with this last album, I don't even recognize Opeth anymore. For me, Opeth is really the big one on this list. So that's number one. Number two, I think, was really the first time that I actually was kind of shocked that a band didn't actually sound anything like themselves anymore. And they went off in a completely different direction. And I really hate that I have to put this band on this list because, well, they're really not going to be around anymore to kind of defend themselves or maybe potentially swing back around to their original sound, because unfortunately number two is Linkin Park. If you've not heard Linkin Park, I mean, Hybrid Theory and Meteora really were like that perfect blend of metal and rap in that new metal style. And it was so well received on Hybrid Theory. It was an incredible debut album. And then Meteora kind of went off a little bit more, experimental for them, but it still kind of remained in that same vein. And it was a really well done album. Minutes to Midnight saw them strip back a little bit. And it wasn't as much of the hip hop side. It was more of the rock and maybe a little bit of metal blended in. But then where the train comes off the tracks is A Thousand Suns. And this was a completely off the rails electronic album that you really started to kind of see popularized around that time, where it was like this bigger than life electronic sound, and it just wasn't the Linkin Park you knew. And then moving on into Living Things and Recharged and The Hunting Party, and finally ending up with One More Light, Linkin Park, from Hybrid Theory to now these other albums post Minutes to Midnight, you could almost consider them to be a completely separate band. Like, I don't think at any point they ever came remotely close to sounding like the debut album. So that is going to be number two. And number three, this one is going to be a shocker for a lot of people because they have gone so far away from their debut album that I think this is an example of a band doing it and becoming successful. Now, the other two, you can kind of say, you're treading waters whether they're successful or not. To some, Linkin Park, yeah, they were still successful after A Thousand Suns and going into, the later albums. And then Opeth, I think you can kind of see like them on like the down slope. It's not like full-blown nosedive, but it's kind of like, taking the bunny hill down. And now we're looking at a band that was, I think, digging themselves out of a ditch and then blew up and became your mom's favorite band at one point in time. I'm talking about the Goo Goo Dolls.
Oh, snap.
So
go ahead, lay down some history here.
Oh, man, if you don't know about the Goo Goo Dolls and their early history, they sounded like 80s speed punk meets the Misfits. I think that's pretty much the best way I can say it. And their debut album, just simply called Goo Goo Dolls, they kind of looked like they were going for that almost horror like type font on their debut album, just self-titled Goo Goo Dolls. And the track listing includes a cover of Sunshine of Your Love and Don't Fear the Reaper. So this is a far, far cry from the Goo Goo Dolls that we all know today. The first time that I can even think that the Goo Goo Dolls even went anywhere near, what they're known for nowadays is on their, what is it, their fourth album, excuse me, Superstar Car Wash. There's a song called Fallen Down, which you can kind of hear them maybe tinkering around with. We're going to experiment with sounding a little bit different. And then the album after that in 1995, A Boy Named Goo, that was where, the song Name came in, and everybody really got their first proper taste of the Goo Goo Dolls, because that's, when they got all the radio play, and, they got on like all the soft rock stations at that point. And then 1998, Dizzy Up the Girl. This is them. Hey, you know what? We got a little bit of money. Can we do this again? Yeah, let's do it again. So Dizzy, Slide, Broadway, Black Balloon, that's the album that everybody knows. So yeah, going further and further and further on into their catalog, there is not a shred of that debut 1987 album left with the Goo Goo Dolls. And only with their Rarities album do they really kind of dabble a little bit into it. But yeah, there's nothing left of the original punk Goo Goo Dolls.
If you wanna know a little fun trivia fact too, their sophomore and third album was released by Metal Blade Records. That's
There you
how
go.
down the punk rabbit hole they were back in the beginning days. I mean, I'm pretty sure. I mean, even for Metal Blade to have a punk band on that label, even during that period in the early '90s, is still kind of shocking. But I mean, I think clearly they were hoping that might help them broaden their roster. But yeah, that's how like punk they were, that they were actually on a metal label like Metal Blade.
So if you really want to, throw a wrench into like your own little trivia night, there you go.
There you go.
Did you know the Goo Goo Dolls at one time were a speed punk Misfits-esque band
on Metal Blade Records.
On Metal Blade Records. So there you go. Those are my three. Opeth,
pretty damn good list.
Opeth, Linkin Park, and the Goo Goo Dolls. What
pretty
say you?
List. It might be tough for me to beat them. I'm not gonna lie, but I think you know what? I'm re-looking at my list now. I think I got this still too. This is going to be a tough one to determine the final three, because it's going to be tough. But let me start off with a little British blues rock band that became the biggest mainstream pop rock band of the 70s. Yeah, I'm talking about Fleetwood Mac. A little history lesson. They literally, in 1967 when they formed, they were your standard typical blues rock band that were getting critical acclaim. They had some hits under their belt, but they were going through a lot of lineup changes. And by 1974, Mick Fleetwood was in LA and he heard the American folk rock duo Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. They had their own little minor success, the two of them. They were lovers, they were collaborators, and Mick wanted Lindsey to join the band, but Lindsey had the one condition of, no, yeah, but my lover has to join us. And wouldn't you know it, that was probably an instance of it being a great thing that he stood his ground. Because pretty much once Lindsey and Stevie Nicks joined Fleetwood Mac, they just helped them transform their sound into something more accessible. And it led to massive success albums like the self-titled album. And of course, that little blockbuster of an album, Rumors, an album that even after its 1977 release is still selling hundreds and thousands of copies. I mean, and it spawned huge hits. That album alone is the ultimate breakup album. It's still to this day. But it sounds nothing like their first blues rock album. I mean, it's kind of hard to even imagine them being anything but the pop rock that they produced. And it's even hard to kind of imagine Fleetwood Mac without Stevie Nicks in general. So Fleetwood Mac, my first pick. Their transformation from blues rock British band to the global phenomenon pop rock act. My second pick, and this gets a little tricky because you can look at this in one of two ways. You could make the argument of, well, if we're counting EPs, then the Beastie Boys went from being a hardcore punk band playing basically basements in New York City to on their EP Polyrog Stew to becoming party rap gods with their actual proper debut album, Licensed to Ill. But you could even make the argument, if you don't want to count the EP, that they, over time, went from the party rap rock sounds of Licensed to Ill And with each album incorporated a lot more different elements of hip hop and a lot more different elements of even punk and alternative music. So basically, by the time they released their final album, they were much more of just an alternative rap group than they were to the original party rap rock that got them to the mainstream success that they ultimately had. And, because they could have easily been pigeonholed in that sound, but they've evolved over time. So, second band, my second pick, the Beastie Boys. The third, and this is where I was kind of torn. I'm torn between one of two acts. And you know what? I'm going to go in a different route. I'm going to save one for as an honorary mention, but for my third pick, go with a little trio out of Australia. When they started in the late 60s, they were sometimes even psychedelic pop act. They found some moderate success. But then as the 70s went on, they kind of lost some steam. The band was called it quits. And then they were encouraged to incorporate some of the more dance elements that was starting to really crept into the music scene. And as a result, they contributed to a soundtrack that ushered in the disco era. And they became the biggest group, not just in disco, but of just the world. Love it or hate it, they were responsible for pretty much making disco music mainstream. Yeah, I'm talking about the Bee Gees. It's hard to think that the same band that did Staying Alive also did some of their earlier works with the pop sound. So yeah, I'm going to go for my third pick with the Bee Gees. So to recap, bands that sound nothing like their debut: Bee Gees, Fleetwood Mac, and the Beastie Boys. And before we delve into trying to find an agreement on the final three, I feel like I'm actually a little surprised. I was kind of expecting you to say Pantera, because their first three albums before they went to a major label were just pure glam metal with a little hint of power metal to it too. To the point that when we talked about Cowboys from Hell, how that was such a transformational album for them when we discussed the best of 1990, best albums of 1990. But literally, like, you look at Reinventing Steel and that first Pantera album, it's like a completely different band. Like, they went really head on into the more extreme styles of metal. So I thought that might go on your list, but you proved me wrong, Matt.
I could have, but I just didn't want to.
It's been talked about a lot.
It has been. We've talked about it a little bit. I don't know. I'd feel like something like the Goo Goo Dolls is a little bit more shocking, if you will.
No, that completely agreed. Do you have any honorable mentions you want to throw out there before we do the impossible of trying to determine a final three here?
No, I'm good.
So I'm not gonna lie. I don't know if I have a compromise, because I think all six acts really do. You can make an argument for all six acts. I mean, so I guess let me put it to you. Out of the three I mentioned, which one stands out as contenders?
I would probably have to go with Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah.
The Bee Gees, you're saying they went from pop to disco. I don't think that that's a huge leap. But then again, I've never heard the Bee Gees prior to disco.
It's like psychedelic pop. It's pretty different. But I think Fleetwood Mac I would definitely fight for. All right, you know what? I will make a proposition, a compromise.
Okay.
And I think you're gonna like this. Fleetwood Mac, Goo Goo Dolls, and Opeth.
I think I can get on board with that.
Because I think the argument I would make regarding the other picks, so like, you can argue that Beastie Boys, they've always had a little bit of rock influence throughout the genre, throughout the albums, despite it being, different. I would argue the same thing about Linkin Park. That last album was really the one time that they really went pop. I would argue that the albums, like, they definitely, like, I'm blanking on the name of the album before One More Light, but that one, they definitely did a return to more of the hard rock sound. They kind of went back and forth between trying to go to their new metal roots to incorporating more of an electronic pop sound. But that last album definitely was like, no, this is them trying to get on Z100.
Well, I mean, 1,000 Suns was a complete departure. Like, that one was completely electronic. Like, you could see, like, when they did the single New Divide for the Transformers soundtrack, that they were trying to, I think, go a little bit, like, test the waters with that electronic sound. But then 1,000 Suns was like, oh, here you go. Here's a whole Linkin Park electronic album. Like, where the hell did that come from?
Side note slash story. And I might have shared this already when we actually revisited Hyper Theory. But I actually even it might have been for 1,000 Suns, but I forget. It was whatever album came out in 2010.
That's it. It's his Thousand Sons.
So I remember I was starting an internship at the music marketing company that I ended up working for after college. It was my first summer internship there. And in the building that their offices were based out of, there's a bunch of studios and other music related businesses. And Machine, who produced a lot of Lamb of God's albums and Clutch's albums, he was based in that building for a little while. So one afternoon, Linkin Park released a new single off of that album. So the producer Machine comes into the office like, oh, the new Linkin Park song. Because at that time, they were still, news bending. Not that they were never, big news, but they were still probably one of the last big rock bands. So we play the song, and everyone in the room is surprised because it's like, this is like Euro trash pop. What is going on? And as I'm listening to this, I'm like, this song sounds eerily familiar. Like, why is this? And then suddenly it just hit me. I'm like, wait a minute. This was the country Turkey's song that they included for Eurovision. And everyone's like, wait, what? And I explained, like, yeah, there's a song that the country Turkey nominated to be their song for Eurovision in 2010. And it sounds just like it's the same electro riff. It's the same pattern. And then Machine, the producer, goes, wait, what is Eurovision? And from there, I ended up giving him basically a crash course history lesson about what Eurovision was. And his mind was just blown away. He's like, wait, so this American Idol on steroids? Wait, it's a country? It's not just saying. And like, he was just like blown away by this. And I just kept thinking, oh my God, this is the man responsible for some of Lamb of God's heaviest work, as well as Clutch's best work up to that day too. Holy crap, I'm educating this massive, great producer in hard rock about Eurovision. Best summer internship ever. So I always just have fun. I mean, and it really, you go back to that first single and look up I forget the name of the song that represented Turkey in Eurovision that year. But literally, I was more amazed that there weren't more call outs or criticisms of how that basically ripped that song off, because it was just uncanny, the resemblance of it.
Well, one of the things that I remember most about the album was I was a huge Call of Duty player at the time, and I forget which Call of Duty it was. There's been so many. That one of the songs off of the album was going to be like the song that led the trailer for Call of Duty, and I was thinking, okay, this is new Linkin Park. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. And then they dropped it, and I was like, what is this? What am I listening to? I think it was The Catalyst. I could be wrong, but I think that was it, because it's the only name when I look at the track listing that I actually remember. And it was so bad, in my opinion. It was too different for Linkin Park.
So they're definitely a good example of it, being a change that wasn't the greatest. I would still argue, though, to your point, and granted, it might not have had as big of implications as Linkin Park's change did, but it is kind of sad to hear Opeth and how they really transformed into a heavy progressive 70s rock band.
It's
and not
quite
even that
boring. It's quite boring.
When you and I saw them, so Matt, you ready to feel old?
6 years ago.
No, 5.
Oh, 5. Okay, so it's not that
less
bad.
old. So less old. We were lucky enough to see Opeth, Gojira, and Devin Townsend, all 3 of those acts, live together at Starland Ballroom. If you're from the Jersey area, we don't have to tell you how insane it is to see those 3 bands together, let alone separately, in an intimate setting like that. And of course, Devin Townsend was amazing. Gojira, incredible, unsurprisingly. And then Opeth came on, and we both were just like, oh my God, will they get on with it already? Like, it was just, ugh.
Yeah. When they play some of their older stuff, you can really feel that there's just a different level of energy. Like my brother and I, we went to see Opeth when they did the entire Ghost Reveries album. And that album, for me, is probably my favorite album from Opeth. It really kind of blends together, some of their softer stuff on a song like Atonement, and then the Grand Conjuration is just an incredible song. The Bang of the Hounds is so heavy. You just listen to something like that, and the energy that just radiates off of it is incredible in comparison to what they do later on with like even Sorceress. Like Sorceress was not all that different, but still just a completely different energy. And Pale Communion, like they tried, they really tried, and it just didn't work.
If I'm getting my albums in order correct, I believe that if they had released Pale Communion first before all those albums you mentioned first,
Heritage.
If they did it before Heritage, I actually think the transition would have been a little bit better because I felt like there were some interesting moments on Pale Communion.
There is, but there is no energy on that album that kind of matches anything else that they did earlier. And Heritage completely turned me off to the band. I tried.
Yeah, Heritage was just a boring album. Besides that first single that was like, oh, this is kind of interesting, it was just a boring album.
Yeah, I tried so many times with that, and then I tried Pale Communion, and I think Cusp of Eternity and then Moon Above and Sun Below are really... Oh, wait, Eternal Rains Will Come. That's a good song. I'll give them that. Those first three tracks are really the big high points of Pale Communion, and then everything else after that is like bleh. And then Sorceress, it's just a mixture of things that are good, I guess. I mean, if any other band released that, like if you told me that there was this new 70s progressive rock band that came out that kind of sounds a little like Opeth, and they released Sorceress, I'd be all over it. But since it's Opeth,
I think that's the problem. That's the problem, is that like literally it's because it's Opeth that makes you get like really hard on them about it.
Right.
And rightfully so.
And then on the last one, Incauda Venenium, I think that's how you say it.
I couldn't get into it.
No, and it's very pretentious. Michael, however you say it, I'm just going to call him Michael. Michael, he even said that he wanted to be the sole producer and I think like a good majority of the writing. And it's just not good. Like, dude, you need the input of other people. It can't just be you doing everything. It's a sad state of affairs what Opeth was and where they are now. And I would love, not even for them to go all the way back to the beginning. Like, don't go Orchid or Morning Rise or Deliverance. Don't go that far back. Like, just go to Ghost Reveries and stay there. Or maybe if you want to do another album like Damnation, because that was some great writing and just some great music in general. But people got on them because it wasn't all about, the death metal and all about the ultra progressiveness to it. It was just like some great straight ahead songs, and it was just good.
Okay, so to wrap everything up, I think we can agree though. Final three: Fleetwood Mac, Opeth, and the Goo Goo Dolls.
Never were those three bands ever in another list together.
But here we are. Those are the three bands that sound nothing like their debut, or at least the bands that we think best capture what we're trying to get in this episode. Do you agree with us? Do you think there's a band that we're forgetting that we were like, guys, what are you thinking? Of course you should have named that band. They sounded nothing like their debut. Let us know on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at Epic Footnote. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel to hear more podcasts like this, as well as check out some pretty cool videos. And thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Lucky 13 Beard Co. Again, go to lucky13beardco.com, use the code EFP10 to get 10% off of your own orders of beard oils and other care products, including our Lemmy-inspired beard oil. It smells great, we promise. Also, thank you to Rootless Coffee. They produce some really delicious blends of coffee out of Flint, Michigan. And they also work with a lot of cool artists, comic book writers, wrestlers like the famous Dan Halson on their own specialty coffee blends. Go to rootlesscoffee.com, use the code EPICROAST, and you'll get 15% off your order. Can't beat that. Thank you all again, and we hope you join us in another episode real soon.
See ya.